In a quiet neighborhood surrounded by tall trees and neatly trimmed lawns, there stood an estate that seemed different from the rest. The house was huge, with gleaming white walls, massive iron gates, and security cameras everywhere. It belonged to a woman who lived alone and rarely stepped outside. Her name wasn't important. What mattered was how she carried herself. She drove expensive cars, wore designer clothes, and threw parties that everyone talked about but few attended. The neighbors called her the rich lady, though no one really knew much about her. She kept to herself, and her property always felt like a fortress. People would sometimes see her walking in her garden or sitting by the pool, sipping something fancy from a crystal glass. But over time, they started noticing something unusual, a young boy who appeared on the estate every now and then. He didn't look like he belonged there. While the house screamed luxury, the boy wore old clothes that looked hand-me-down. His shoes were scuffed and his face had dirt smudges as if he'd been working hard. Neighbors whispered among themselves when they saw him sweeping leaves off the driveway or carrying heavy trays inside the house. Some thought maybe he was a relative staying with her temporarily. Others guessed he might be helping out as part of some charity program. After all, the rich lady was known for donating money to causes here and there. But doubt lingered in people's minds. Why did the boy never smile? Why did he seem so cautious whenever anyone came close? And why did he disappear after just a few minutes, retreating back into the shadows of the mansion? One afternoon, curiosity turned into suspicion. A delivery driver pulled up to the gate with a package for the rich lady. As he waited for someone to open the gate, he noticed the boy standing near a tree, clutching a broom tightly. At first glance, it seemed normal enough. He was probably cleaning up. But then the boy glanced around nervously before whispering something almost too soft to hear. "Help me." The words froze the delivery driver in place. He blinked, unsure if he'd imagined them. But the boy's eyes told him everything he needed to know. There was fear in those wide, pleading eyes, mixed with desperation. Before the driver could say anything, the boy quickly turned away and hurried toward the house, disappearing through the front door. Shaken, the delivery driver finished dropping off the package and left. But the moment stayed with him. That single phrase echoed in his mind long after he drove away. Something wasn't right. No child should have to beg for help like that. Not in broad daylight, not in such a fancy neighborhood. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that he couldn't ignore what he'd seen. Later that evening, he decided to call the local authorities. He explained what had happened, describing the boy's appearance and behavior. At first, the officer on the other end sounded skeptical. Rich people often hired staff, including kids from poorer families, to help around the house. Maybe the boy was exaggerating or misunderstood. Still, the delivery driver insisted they check it out. Something deep down told him this wasn't just a misunderstanding. The next day, police officers arrived at the mansion. They rang the bell and knocked on the door, but no one answered immediately. Finally, the rich lady appeared, looking irritated. She demanded to know why they were disturbing her peace. When asked about the boy, she hesitated for a split second before brushing it off. "Oh, him? He's just helping out," she said casually. "Nothing to worry about." Her tone was confident, even dismissive. But the officers weren't satisfied. They requested permission to search the premises, citing concerns about the welfare of a minor. Reluctantly, she agreed, though her expression darkened as they stepped inside. What they discovered shocked them, and later, the entire neighborhood. Hidden behind locked doors in a remote corner of the mansion was a small room. Barely furnished, it contained only a thin mattress on the floor, a bucket, and a pile of worn-out clothes. The air smelled stale, as if the space hadn't been aired out in weeks. In that room, they found evidence suggesting the boy had been living there under strict supervision, cut off from the outside world. It was clear now. The rich lady hadn't simply hired a helper. She had taken control of his life, keeping him confined and isolated. The boy confirmed their worst fears when questioned. He spoke softly, his voice trembling as he revealed how he ended up in her care. Promises of education, safety, and a better future had lured him away from his struggling family. Instead, he found himself trapped, forced to work without pay or freedom. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. How could someone with so much wealth and privilege treat another human being this way? The answer lay somewhere between arrogance and ignorance, a toxic mix that allowed the rich lady to believe she knew best regardless of the consequences. As news spread, people struggled to make sense of it all. Was the rich lady truly evil, or was she misguided? Could someone so disconnected from reality ever understand the harm she caused? These questions hung in the air, unanswered. For now. What was certain was that the boy's life would never be the same again. Neither would the lives of those who bore witness to his plight. The discovery of the boy's living conditions sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbors who had once admired the rich lady's glamorous lifestyle now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about her. The image of elegance and generosity she had carefully crafted over the years began to crumble, revealing a darker truth beneath. When the police took the boy out of the mansion, he looked both terrified and relieved. His eyes darted around as if expecting something bad to happen at any moment, but there was also a flicker of hope in them, a hope that maybe, just maybe, his nightmare was finally ending. Officers wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and spoke to him gently, trying to reassure him that he was safe now. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't have to worry about being watched or punished for speaking up. Back at the station, social workers joined the investigation team to talk to the boy. They made sure he was comfortable, offering him snacks and soft drinks while asking simple questions to piece together his story. He hesitated at first, clearly unsure whether these strangers could be trusted. But as the hours passed, he opened, a bit by bit, sharing details that painted a heartbreaking picture of his life inside the mansion. He explained how he came from a family struggling to make ends meet. His parents worked long hours for little pay and food was often scarce. One day, the rich lady approached them with an offer they couldn't refuse. She would take care of their son, give him a proper education, and provide opportunities they could only dream of. Desperate and believing her promises, they agreed, thinking they were doing what was best for their child. At first, things seemed okay. The boy moved into the mansion, where he was given new clothes and a bed to sleep in. But soon the reality of his situation became clear. Instead of going to school, he spent his days working, cleaning, cooking, running errands, and doing whatever else the rich lady demanded. She told him it was part of his training, insisting that hard work would shape him into a better person. If he complained or tried to resist, she scolded him harshly, making him feel ungrateful and worthless. As the boy spoke, tears welled up in his eyes, but he wiped them away quickly. He didn't want pity. He just wanted to tell the truth. He described how he wasn't allowed to leave the property without permission, which was rarely granted. When visitors came over, he was instructed to stay out of sight unless needed to, serve food or drinks. Even then, he had to keep his head down and avoid eye contact. It was as if he didn't exist except when it suited her needs. The investigators listened intently, their faces growing grimmer with each word. What struck them most was the boy's resilience. Despite everything he'd endured, he still held on to a glimmer of hope. He expressed gratitude for the kindness shown to him by the officers and social workers, saying it reminded him of how people used to treat him before the rich lady took him away. Those memories of love and warmth had kept him going during the darkest times. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, rumors spread like wildfire. People gathered in groups whispering about what had happened. Some were outraged, calling the rich lady a monster who abused her power. Others defended her, arguing that she must have had good intentions, even if her methods were wrong. A few remained silent, unable to process the idea that someone they admired could commit such a cruel act. Local news outlets picked up the story, turning it into a national headline. Reporters camped outside the mansion, snapping photos and interviewing neighbors. The rich lady, now under arrest, refused to comment publicly. Her lawyers issued statements claiming she acted out of concern for the boy's future, framing her actions as misguided rather than malicious. But many weren't convinced. Social media exploded with debates, memes, and hashtags, with some calling for justice and others urging compassion. Amidst all the chaos, the boy remained at the center, of attention, not because he sought it, but because his story resonated deeply with so many people. Parents hugged their children tighter, grateful for the freedom and safety they provided. Teachers talked to their students about recognizing signs of abuse and knowing whom to trust. Activists seized the opportunity to highlight broader issues of exploitation and inequality, urging society to do better in protecting vulnerable individuals. For the boy, however, the focus shifted toward rebuilding his life. Social workers arranged for him to reconnect with his family, who were overwhelmed with guilt and relief upon seeing him again. They apologized repeatedly, promising never to let anyone take him away from them again. Though their financial struggles hadn't disappeared, they vowed to find ways to support him without compromising his dignity. In the weeks that followed, the boy slowly started adjusting to his new normal. With the help of counselors, he processed the trauma he had experienced, learning to express his emotions instead of bottling them up. School officials welcomed him back with open arms, enrolling him in classes tailored to his age and abilities. Friends and classmates reached out, eager to include him in activities and make him feel like part of the group again. Through it all, the boy showed remarkable strength. He didn't dwell on bitterness or anger, though he had every right to. Instead, he chose to focus on the future, determined to create a life filled with purpose and joy. He dreamed of becoming someone who could help others facing similar challenges, someone who could turn pain into progress. As the legal proceedings against the rich lady began, the world watched closely. Would she face consequences for her actions? Or would her wealth shield her from accountability? The answer would come later, but for now the boy's courage inspired countless others to speak out against injustice and fight for a fairer world. The trial of the rich lady became the talk of the town, and soon the entire country. People followed every detail, from the initial hearings to the dramatic testimonies that unfolded in court. It wasn't just about one woman or one boy anymore. It was a story that struck at the heart of society's values. The courtroom buzzed with tension as lawyers, witnesses, and spectators gathered to hear what would happen next. On the first day of the trial, cameras flashed outside the courthouse, capturing images of the rich lady stepping out of a black car. She looked different now, no designer clothes, no expensive jewelry. Instead, she wore a plain dress, her hair pulled back in a simple style. Gone was the confidence she once carried so effortlessly. Now she seemed smaller, almost fragile, as if the weight of her actions had finally caught up with her. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The judge sat sternly at the front, flanked by lawyers on both sides. In the center of it all sat the boy who had endured so much. He was quiet, his hands clasped tightly together, but his presence spoke volumes. Every eye in the room seemed drawn to him, not out of pity, but because he represented something bigger than himself. He was a symbol of resilience, proof that even in the darkest moments there is strength to be found. The prosecution began by laying out their case. They painted a vivid picture of how the rich lady lured the boy away from his family with false promises. Witnesses were called to testify, neighbors who had seen the boy working around the mansion, teachers who remembered him before he disappeared, and social workers who had spoken to him after his rescue. Each account added another layer to the story, making it impossible to ignore the reality of what had happened. One particularly powerful moment came when a psychologist took the stand. She explained how someone in the rich lady's position could convince themselves they were doing the right thing, despite clear evidence to the contrary. Entitlement can blur the lines between helping and controlling, she said. When you believe your wealth gives you authority over others, it becomes easy to justify harmful actions. Her words resonated deeply, not just with those in the courtroom, but with viewers watching from home. The defense tried to counter these arguments, portraying the rich lady as a well-meaning but misguided individual. They emphasized her charitable contributions and claimed she truly believed she was offering the boy a better life. At one point, her lawyer even suggested that the boy might have misunderstood her intentions, implying that his feelings of captivity were exaggerated. But the boy's testimony shattered that narrative. When it was his turn to speak, he stood tall, though his voice trembled slightly. He recounted his experiences without embellishment, sticking to the facts. He described the long hours of work, the isolation, and the constant fear of punishment. He talked about missing his family and feeling trapped in a place where nothing felt real, except the walls closing in around him. By the time he finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. What made his words so impactful wasn't just the content, it was the way he delivered them. There was no anger in his tone, no bitterness, just honesty. He didn't want revenge. He wanted justice. And more than anything, he wanted people to understand that what happened to him shouldn't happen to anyone else. As the trial progressed, public opinion shifted dramatically. Initially, some had been divided, wondering whether the rich lady deserved sympathy or condemnation. But as the evidence mounted, it became harder to defend her actions. Social media lit up with hashtags calling for accountability, while protests erupted in cities across the nation. People held signs reading "No more silence" and "Protect our children," demanding systemic changes to prevent similar cases in the future. For the boy, the attention was overwhelming at times. Reporters hounded him wherever he went, eager to capture sound bites or photographs. Activists reached out, asking him to join campaigns or give speeches. While he appreciated the support, he often felt like he was being pulled in too many directions. He wanted to focus on healing, not becoming a poster child for a movement. Thankfully, he wasn't alone. A network of caring adults stepped in to shield him from the chaos. His family remained steadfast, ensuring he had a safe space to retreat to whenever things got overwhelming. Teachers went above and beyond to help him catch up academically, recognizing that education was key to rebuilding his confidence. Counselors continued to guide him through the emotional scars left by his ordeal, teaching him coping strategies and self-care techniques. Slowly but surely, the boy began to reclaim pieces of his old life. He reconnected with friends he hadn't seen in years, laughing and joking like they used to. He rediscovered hobbies he had forgotten about, finding joy in drawing and playing soccer. Most importantly, he started dreaming again, not just surviving but envisioning a future full of possibilities. Meanwhile, the legal battle raged on. After weeks of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read it aloud, guilty on multiple counts including kidnapping and exploitation. Gasps echoed through the room, followed by murmurs of approval. Justice had been served, or so it seemed. Yet, the sentence handed down sparked mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient, arguing that such crimes warranted harsher punishment. Others believed it was fair, pointing out that the rich lady's age and lack of prior offenses should be considered. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was certain. The case had ignited a national conversation about power, privilege, and responsibility. For the boy, the outcome brought a sense of closure. He didn't feel hatred toward the rich lady. Instead, he felt sorry for her. She had let her ego and entitlement consume her, losing sight of basic human decency along the way. As he walked out of the courthouse that day, surrounded by loved ones, he knew he had emerged stronger than ever. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. He still had scars to heal and challenges to overcome. But he faced them with courage, determined to turn his pain into purpose. Little did he know, his story would inspire countless others to stand up against injustice and fight for a world where everyone, regardless of background, could live freely and with dignity. After the trial ended, life began to settle into a new rhythm for everyone involved. The rich lady disappeared from public view, sentenced to serve time in prison. Her once glamorous world had crumbled, leaving behind nothing but regret and shame. For those who followed the case closely, her downfall served as a stark reminder of how power unchecked can corrupt even the most seemingly untouchable individuals. But while she faded into obscurity, the boy at the center of the story stepped forward, ready to embrace his second chance at life. The media frenzy surrounding the trial eventually died down, but its impact lingered. People couldn't stop talking about what they had learned, not just about the rich lady's actions, but about themselves and their communities. Conversations sprang up everywhere, at dinner tables, in classrooms, and during coffee breaks. Parents warned their children about trusting strangers, no matter how kind or wealthy they seemed. Teachers emphasized the importance of recognizing signs of abuse and knowing where to turn for help. Community leaders organized workshops and awareness campaigns, determined to ensure that no child would ever face a similar fate again. For the boy, stepping back into normal life felt like walking on unsteady ground after years of living in a storm. Everything was unfamiliar, yet familiar all at once. He remembered the streets he used to play on, the faces of old friends, and the warmth of family dinners. But it was as if he were seeing them through new eyes. The world hadn't changed. He had. His time in captivity had left deep marks, both visible and invisible, and learning to live with them took effort. Thankfully, he wasn't alone in this journey. A group of compassionate adults rallied around him, determined to provide the support he needed. His parents, who had carried immense guilt for letting him go in the first place, threw themselves into being present for him. They made sure he felt loved and valued every single day, whether it was by cooking his favorite meals or simply sitting beside him when he needed quiet company. Teachers went out of their way to make school a safe space for him, offering extra tutoring sessions and checking in regularly to see how he was coping. Counselors helped him process his emotions, teaching him techniques to manage anxiety and rebuild trust in others. Slowly but surely, the boy started finding pieces of himself again. Drawing became his escape, a way to express feelings too complicated for words. On blank sheets of paper, he sketched scenes from his past, happy moments with his family, lonely days in the mansion, and hopeful visions of the future. Art gave him a voice when speaking felt impossible, and soon his sketches caught the attention of people beyond his immediate circle. A local art teacher invited him to join an after-school program, where he met other kids who shared his passion. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Sports also played a big role in his recovery. Soccer had always been his favorite game before his life changed, and returning to the field brought back a sense of freedom he thought he'd lost forever. Running across the grass, feeling the sun on his face, and hearing the cheers of teammates reminded him of what it meant to be alive. It wasn't just about scoring goals, it was about connection, teamwork, and proving to himself that he could still dream big. As months passed, the boy grew bolder. He began sharing his story, not because he wanted sympathy, but because he believed it could spark change. At first, he spoke only to small groups like his classmates or members of a youth organization. But word spread quickly, and soon invitations poured in from larger platforms. Local news stations asked him to appear on shows. Schools requested him to speak at assemblies. Nonprofits invited him to share his experiences at conferences aimed at preventing child exploitation. Each time he stood in front of an audience, nerves fluttered in his stomach. What if they judged him? What if they didn't understand? But then he'd look out at the sea of faces and remind himself why he was there: to give others hope, to raise awareness, and to honor the resilience that had carried him through his darkest days. And every time he finished speaking, the applause reassured him that he was making a difference. His courage inspired countless people. Parents hugged their kids tighter after hearing his story, vowing to stay vigilant. Educators reevaluated their policies, ensuring students had access to resources and protection. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at strengthening child welfare laws, citing his case as a catalyst for reform. Even strangers reached out to thank him, saying his bravery had encouraged them to confront injustices in their own lives. Despite the progress, the boy knew healing wasn't linear. Some nights, memories of the mansion crept into his dreams, pulling him back to moments he wished he could forget. During those times, he leaned on his support system, the people who reminded him that he wasn't defined by his pain. Together, they celebrated small victories, completing a tough assignment, scoring a goal in a match, or simply laughing until his sides hurt. These moments added up, slowly filling the void left by years of isolation. One particularly transformative experience came when he joined a mentorship program designed to help young people overcome adversity. There, he met others who had faced challenges of their own. Some had dealt with poverty, others with loss, and a few with discrimination. Hearing their stories made him realize he wasn't alone. More importantly, it showed him the power of resilience. If so many people could rise above their struggles, then he could too. Through the program, he found a new purpose, helping others navigate difficult circumstances. He started volunteering at community centers, leading art classes for kids and teens. He taught them not just how to draw, but how to use creativity as a tool for healing. Watching their faces light up as they created something beautiful filled him with pride and reminded him of how far he'd come. By the end of the year, the boy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Gone was the timid, broken child who emerged from the mansion. In his place stood a confident young person with dreams bigger than anyone imagined. He wanted to study psychology so he could work with children facing trauma. He dreamed of opening a center where kids could find refuge, learn new skills, and discover their potential. Most of all, he wanted to prove that no matter how dark things got, there was always a way forward. As he looked ahead to the future, the boy carried two lessons close to his heart. The first was that kindness mattered more than anything else. It was kindness from neighbors, teachers, counselors, and strangers that had pulled him through his hardest days. The second was that pain could become a force for good. By turning his suffering into action, he was creating a ripple effect that would touch lives far beyond his own. Though scars remained, they no longer weighed him down. Instead, they served as reminders of his strength, a testament to the fact that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, the human spirit could endure, heal, and shine brighter than ever before. As the boy continued to rebuild his life, he began to realize that his journey wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. The pain he had endured didn't disappear, but it became a part of him in a different way. Instead of letting it define him, he used it as fuel to grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Every step forward felt like planting seeds for a better future, not just for himself, but for others who might one day find themselves in similar situations. One of the biggest turning points came when he decided to write down his story. First, it started as a personal project, a way to process everything he had been through. He sat at a small desk in his room every evening, scribbling thoughts into a notebook. Some nights the words flowed easily. Other times they came slowly, like pulling weeds from hard soil. But no matter how difficult it got, he kept going. Writing gave him a sense of control over something he had once felt powerless against. What began as private reflections eventually grew into something bigger. A teacher noticed his passion for storytelling during one of their mentoring sessions and encouraged him to share his work. Hesitant at first, he finally agreed to read an excerpt aloud in class. The reaction stunned him. His classmates listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of sadness, admiration, and hope. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. For the first time, he saw the impact his words could have on others. Encouraged by the response, he began sharing his writing. Outside of school, local newspapers published short pieces he submitted, highlighting his experiences and the lessons he had learned along the way. Community organizations invited him to speak at events, where he combined his speeches with readings from his growing collection of essays. People connected deeply with his honesty and vulnerability, often approaching him afterward to thank him for putting into words what they had struggled to express themselves. The attention brought opportunities he never expected. One day, a well-known author visited his town for a book signing and heard about the boy's story. Intrigued, she reached out to meet him. Over coffee, they talked for hours about writing, resilience, and the power of storytelling. By the end of their conversation, she offered to mentor him, helping him refine his writing and explore publishing options. It was a dream come true, one that pushed him further toward a path he hadn't dared to imagine before. While his newfound success opened doors, it also brought challenges. Fame, even on a local level, attracted scrutiny. Some people criticized him for speaking out, accusing him of seeking attention or exaggerating his ordeal. Others questioned whether he was ready to handle the responsibility of being a public figure. These comments stung, especially when they came from people he thought would understand. But instead of letting negativity pull him down, he leaned on the support system he had built around him. His family reminded him of his worth. His mentors guided him through tough decisions, and his friends cheered him on whenever doubt crept in. Despite the occasional backlash, the overwhelming majority of responses were positive. Strangers sent letters thanking him for inspiring them to face their own struggles. Parents shared stories of how his courage had motivated them to protect their children more fiercely. Teachers implemented discussions about his writings in classrooms, sparking conversations about empathy, justice, and human rights. Each message reinforced his belief that sharing his truth mattered, even if it meant facing criticism along the way. His activism expanded beyond storytelling. Determined to create tangible change, he collaborated with nonprofit organizations focused on child welfare and education. Together, they launched campaigns to raise awareness about exploitation and abuse, emphasizing the importance of early intervention and community involvement. He traveled to schools, shelters, and community centers, delivering talks that combined his personal experiences with practical advice for recognizing warning signs and seeking help. One campaign stood out in particular, a series of workshops aimed at empowering young people to speak up when something didn't feel right. Using interactive activities and real-life examples, he taught participants how to identify red flags, build trust with adults, and advocate for themselves. Watching. Kids light up with confidence after realizing they had a voice filled him with pride. He knew firsthand how isolating fear could be, and seeing others break free from it gave him hope for the future. As his influence grew, so did his determination to give back. With the help of his mentor, he started working on a book, a full account of his journey from captivity to freedom. Writing it wasn't easy. There were days when memories overwhelmed him, forcing him to take breaks and regroup. But each chapter he completed felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. By the time the manuscript was finished, it wasn't just a memoir. It was a call to action, urging readers to confront injustice wherever they found it. The book's release marked another milestone in his life. It quickly gained traction, earning praise from critics and readers alike. Bookstores hosted signings where long lines formed of people eager to meet him and hear his story in person. Media outlets featured interviews, amplifying his message to wider audiences. Through it all, he remained humble, deflecting attention away from himself and redirecting it toward the causes he cared about. Behind the scenes, however, the emotional toll of reliving his past caught up with him at times. Nights were hardest. Memories of the mansion haunted his dreams, leaving him restless and uneasy. On those nights, he turned to art and music as outlets, sketching late into the night or playing songs that calmed his racing mind. Counseling sessions provided additional support, giving him space to unpack lingering emotions without judgment. Slowly, he learned to navigate the balance between advocacy and self-care. Through it all, his family remained his anchor. They celebrated his achievements, comforted him during setbacks, and reminded him daily of how proud they were of the person he had become. Their unwavering love grounded him, keeping him focused on what truly mattered, using his voice to make a difference. By the end of the year, the boy, now a young man, had accomplished more than he ever thought possible. He had written a best-selling book, inspired thousands through his activism, and carved out a place for himself in a world that once tried to silence him. Yet, he knew his work was far from over. Injustice still existed, and there were countless others waiting for someone to stand beside them. Looking ahead, he dreamed of expanding his efforts globally. He envisioned creating a foundation dedicated to supporting vulnerable children, offering resources, education, and safe spaces for healing. He wanted to travel the world, meeting survivors and learning from their stories, then amplifying their voices so the world couldn't ignore them. Most importantly, he hoped to leave behind a legacy of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could be found if you kept searching for it. For now, though, he took things one day at a time. Each sunrise brought new possibilities, and each sunset marked another step forward. He carried the scars of his past not as burdens but as badges of honor, proof that he had faced unimaginable hardship and emerged stronger because of it. And as he stood on stage at the end of yet another event, looking out at the sea of faces cheering for him, He knew one thing for certain. His story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who dared to believe in the power of resilience, compassion, and change. As the young man's influence continued to grow, he realized that his journey was no longer just about him. It had become a movement. People from all walks of life were drawn to his story because it wasn't just a tale of survival. It was a blueprint for resilience. He had shown them that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, there was always a way forward. But with this newfound responsibility came challenges he hadn't anticipated. One of the biggest hurdles was learning how to balance his personal life with his advocacy work. His days were packed with speaking engagements, interviews, and meetings, with organizations eager to partner with him. While he loved the opportunity to make a difference, the constant demands left little room for rest. Friends noticed the toll it was taking on him. They'd joke about how he needed a vacation, but their concern was real. He knew they were right. He couldn't pour from an empty cup. But stepping back felt impossible when so many people relied on him. His family stepped in once again, reminding him that self-care wasn't selfish. It was necessary. "You can't help anyone if you're running on empty," his mom told him one evening over dinner. Her words hit home. That night he made a promise to himself. He would set boundaries. It wasn't easy at first. Saying no felt unnatural after years of saying yes, but slowly, he began carving out time for himself. He started journaling again, rediscovering the joy of putting pen to paper without worrying about deadlines or audiences. On weekends, he spent hours outdoors, hiking trails or sitting by the lake, letting nature heal what words couldn't. These moments of peace helped him recharge, giving him the energy to tackle the next phase of his mission. One idea he had been mulling over for months finally took shape. A foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable children and empowering survivors. With the support of mentors and activists, he launched the initiative, naming it something simple, yet powerful: Rising Together. The name reflected not only his own journey, but also the collective strength of communities coming together to create change. The foundation quickly gained traction, thanks in part to the buzz surrounding his book and public appearances. Donations poured in from individuals and corporations alike, enabling Rising Together to fund programs focused on education, mental health support, and advocacy. One of its flagship projects was a hotline staffed by trained counselors available 24/7 for kids and teens who needed someone to talk to. Another initiative provided grants to schools and community centers to host workshops on recognizing signs of abuse and fostering safe environments. But what truly set Rising Together apart was its emphasis on storytelling. The young man believed deeply in the power of sharing experiences as a tool for healing and connection. Through the foundation, he organized events where survivors could come together to tell their stories, whether through spoken word, art, music, or writing. These gatherings weren't just about raising awareness, they were about building a sense of belonging. For many participants, it was the first time they felt seen and heard without judgment. One such event stood out vividly in his memory. Held in a large auditorium, it brought together hundreds of people, young and old, survivors and allies, all united by a desire to create change. As the lights dimmed and the program began, performers took turns sharing pieces of their lives. A teenage girl sang a hauntingly beautiful song she had written about finding hope after trauma. A middle-aged man recited a poem about breaking free from cycles of abuse. And then there was a boy, barely 10 years old, who shyly walked onto the stage clutching a drawing. When asked to explain it, he said simply, "This is me before, and this is me now." The room erupted in applause, tears streaming down faces. The young man watched from the sidelines, overwhelmed by the moment. This was why he did what he did, not for fame or recognition, but for moments like these, where people found courage in each other's stories and strength in shared vulnerability. Yet, despite the progress, setbacks still occurred. Not everyone supported his efforts. Critics accused him of profiting off his trauma, pointing to the success of his book and foundation as evidence. Others dismissed his message as naive, claiming systemic issues couldn't be solved by goodwill alone. Some even tried to discredit him, digging up old details of his past in an attempt to undermine his credibility. It hurt, of course, how could it not? But instead of lashing out, he chose to respond with grace and determination. "If I let negativity stop me, then they win," he told a close friend during a particularly tough week. "I'm doing this for the ones who need us most." That resolve carried him through the toughest times. He surrounded himself with people who uplifted him, mentors who guided him, peers who inspired him, and supporters who reminded him why he started in the first place. Together, they brainstormed solutions to challenges, celebrated victories big and small, and leaned on each other when things got overwhelming. One victory that stood out was the passage of a new law aimed at strengthening protections for children in vulnerable situations. Lawmakers credited his advocacy as a key factor in pushing the legislation forward, citing his testimony and the widespread public support generated by Rising Together. Standing in the gallery as the bill was signed into law, he felt a surge of pride, not just for himself but for everyone who had fought alongside him. Change wasn't easy, but it was possible. As the years went by, the young man evolved from a survivor to a leader, from a voice in the crowd to a beacon of hope. Yet, he never forgot where he came from. He often returned to the neighborhood where his nightmare began, visiting schools and community centers to share his story with kids growing up in similar circumstances. "You deserve to be free," he'd tell them. "And if anyone tries to take that away from you, don't stay silent. Speak up. Someone will listen." Those visits kept him grounded, reminding him of the importance of staying connected to the people he served. They also gave him a chance to reflect on how far he'd come. The mansion that once symbolized captivity now represented something else entirely, a reminder of the strength it took to break free and the life he had built since. Looking ahead, he dreamed of expanding Rising Together's reach globally. He envisioned partnerships with international organizations, campaigns tailored to different cultures, and resources translated into multiple languages. He wanted every child, no matter where they lived, to know they weren't alone, and that help was always within reach. For now, though, he focused on the present, cherishing the relationships he had built and the impact he had made. Each day brought new opportunities to inspire, educate, and uplift. And as he stood on stage at yet another event, looking out at the sea of hopeful faces, he knew one thing for certain. His story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone brave, enough to rise above their struggles and fight for a better future, for themselves and for others. As the young man's foundation Rising Together continued to grow, it became clear that his mission was resonating far beyond his wildest dreams. What started as a small idea fueled by personal pain had transformed into a global movement, touching lives across borders and cultures. But with every milestone came new challenges and new lessons about the complexities of creating lasting change. One of the biggest challenges he faced was navigating the politics of activism. While most people embraced his message of hope and resilience, others saw his work as a threat to systems they benefited from. Some politicians pushed back against the policies he advocated for, arguing that they were too costly or impractical. Corporations accused him of being anti-business when he called out exploitative practices targeting vulnerable communities. Even within charitable circles, there were disagreements about how best to allocate resources and prioritize initiatives. First, these conflicts overwhelmed him. He wasn't prepared for the pushback, especially from groups he thought would support his cause. There were moments when he questioned whether he was cut out for this kind of work. Wasn't he just a survivor trying to make a difference? Why did everything have to feel like such a battle? But then he remembered something his mentor once told him. Change doesn't happen without resistance. If you're not making anyone uncomfortable, you're probably not doing enough. Those words stuck with him, giving him the strength to keep going. Instead of shrinking away from criticism, he leaned into it, using it as fuel to refine his approach. He surrounded himself with advisors who understood the intricacies of policymaking and community organizing, learning from their expertise while staying true to his vision. Another challenge was managing the emotional weight of hearing so many stories similar to his own. As Rising Together expanded, more survivors reached out to share their experiences. Some wrote letters, others sent emails, and a few showed up unannounced at events, desperate to speak to someone who might understand. Each story broke his heart, anew, reminding him of the pain he had worked so hard to heal from. It wasn't easy to carry that burden day after day. Sometimes he'd lie awake at night, replaying snippets of conversations in his head, voices filled with fear, anger, and desperation. Other times he'd find himself zoning out during meetings, lost in thoughts about the countless lives still trapped in cycles of abuse and neglect. The weight of responsibility often felt suffocating. To cope, he turned to therapy, a practice he encouraged others to embrace but hadn't prioritized for himself until now. Sitting in a counselor's office, talking openly about his fears and frustrations, helped him process emotions he had buried deep inside. It also reminded him that he didn't have to shoulder everything alone. His team stepped up too, taking on tasks that allowed him to focus on what mattered most, connecting with people and amplifying their voices. Despite the obstacles, there were moments of pure joy that kept him grounded. One such moment came during a visit to a rural village in another country. Through partnerships with international organizations, Rising Together had set up a program to educate children about their rights and provide safe spaces for them to express themselves. When he arrived, the kids greeted him with songs and handmade signs written in colorful markers. Their smiles lit up the room, erasing any trace of exhaustion he had been feeling. During the visit, one little girl tugged at his sleeve, holding out a drawing she had made. It depicted two figures standing side by side under a bright sun, surrounded by flowers and birds. "This is you," she said, pointing to one figure. "And this is me. We're strong together." Her words brought tears to his eyes, not because they were profound, but because they were simple and true. That's what Rising Together was all about, standing shoulder to shoulder with those who needed support, no matter where they came from. Back home, the foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary with a gala attended by hundreds of supporters. Speeches were given, awards were handed out, and videos showcased the impact of their work. But the highlight of the evening came when a teenager named Alex took the stage. Alex had grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home until finding stability through a program funded by Rising Together. Now at 16, he was excelling in school and planning to pursue a career in social work. "I used to think my story didn't matter," Alex said, his voice steady despite the crowd. "But then I met him and I realized that my voice could make a difference. So here I am telling you guys, don't give up. Keep fighting for what's right because someone out there needs to hear your story." The room erupted in applause, and the young man couldn't help but smile through his tears. Moments like these reminded him why he kept pushing forward, even when the road got tough. Every success, no matter how small, was a step toward a brighter future. Still, he knew the fight was far from over. Exploitation and inequality weren't problems that could be solved overnight. They required constant vigilance, collaboration, and innovation. To stay ahead, he began exploring new ways to expand Rising Together's reach. Technology played a key role. Apps designed to connect survivors with resources, online courses teaching kids about safety and self-worth, and virtual events bringing together advocates from around the world. These tools allowed the foundation to adapt to an ever-changing landscape while staying accessible to those who needed it most. Through it all, he remained committed to leading with compassion. He never wanted Rising Together to become just another faceless organization. It was important to him that people saw the humanity behind the mission, that they knew real people cared deeply about their struggles and dreams. That's why he made time for personal interactions, whether it was responding to messages from survivors, visiting schools to talk to students, or simply sitting down with volunteers to thank them for their hard work. As the years passed, the young man grew older, wiser, and more determined than ever. He had seen firsthand how much progress was possible when people came together with a shared purpose. But he also knew that change was messy and unpredictable. There would always be setbacks, critics, and moments of doubt. Yet, none of that mattered. as long as he stayed focused on the goal, creating a world where every child could grow up free, safe, and loved. Looking back, he marveled at how far he had come, from a scared boy locked away in a mansion to a leader inspiring thousands to rise above their circumstances. The scars of his past were still there, etched into his soul, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of his strength and resilience, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, light could break through. And so he pressed on, driven by the belief that every life mattered and every voice deserved to be heard. Whether speaking to a packed auditorium or chatting with a single child, he carried the same message. You are stronger than you think, braver than you feel, and worth so much more than anyone has ever told you. It was a message he hoped would echo long after he was gone, inspiring generations to come to continue the fight for justice, equality, and hope. Years passed, and the young man who had once been a victim of unimaginable circumstances grew into a symbol of hope for countless others. Rising Together wasn't just a foundation anymore. It was a movement, a beacon of light in places where darkness had lingered for too long. The boy's story, which began as a tale of captivity and pain, had transformed into a legacy of resilience, courage, and transformation. But even as he stood at the forefront of this global effort, he never lost sight of the humanity that drove him forward. One day, while attending a conference on child welfare, he met an elderly woman who approached him with tears in her eyes. She introduced herself as a retired teacher who had followed his journey from the beginning. "You remind me of one of my students," she said softly. "He was taken advantage of too, but back then no one listened. I couldn't save him." Her voice cracked and she paused to collect herself. "But because of you, maybe we can save others." Her words struck a chord deep within him. It reminded him that change didn't happen overnight. It was built brick by brick, generation by generation. He realized that his work wasn't just about helping those alive today. It was also about honoring those who came before, whose voices were silenced or ignored. In some ways, he felt like he was carrying their stories alongside his own, giving them a second chance to be heard. This sense of responsibility pushed him to think bigger. While Rising Together had accomplished so much, there were still gaps to fill, communities untouched, systems unchallenged, and hearts unchanged. He knew he couldn't do everything, but he could inspire others to join the fight. So he shifted his focus slightly, dedicating more time to mentoring young activists and leaders who showed promise. He believed deeply in the power of passing the torch, ensuring that the movement would continue long after he stepped aside. These young advocates came from all walks of life. Some had faced hardships similar to his, while others were driven purely by empathy and a desire to make the world better. They brought fresh perspectives and innovative ideas, breathing new energy into the foundation. Together, they brainstormed campaigns, launched grassroots initiatives, and collaborated with organizations across the globe. Watching them take charge filled him with pride, knowing that the future was in capable hands. Still, he made sure to stay connected to the ground level, where real lives were being impacted every day. He visited shelters, schools, and community centers regularly, listening to people's stories and offering whatever support he could. These interactions kept him grounded, reminding him that behind every statistic was a human being with dreams, fears, and untapped potential. One such visit took him to a small town, devastated by poverty and neglect. The local school had partnered with Rising Together to provide resources for children living in unstable conditions. As he walked through the classrooms, he noticed a mural painted on one wall. It depicted a tree with sprawling branches, each leaf bearing the name of a student. At the base of the tree were words written in bold letters: "We are rooted in hope." The principal explained that the mural was created as part of a workshop aimed at teaching kids about resilience and self-worth. "It's become a symbol for our community," she said. "Every time something bad happens, we remind ourselves that we're stronger together." Hearing this, the young man felt a lump in his throat. This was exactly what he had hoped Rising Together would achieve, not just solving problems, but planting seeds of hope that would grow over time. As the years went by, his role evolved. He transitioned from being the face of the movement to becoming its guiding force, working behind the scenes to ensure its sustainability. He handed leadership responsibilities to trusted colleagues, many of whom he had mentored over the years. Though he remained involved, his presence became less visible, allowing others to step into the spotlight. In his quieter moments, he often reflected on how far he had come. From the days when he felt invisible and powerless, locked away in a mansion, to now standing as a pillar of strength for so many, the contrast was staggering. Yet he never saw himself as extraordinary. To him, he was simply someone who refused to give up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And if he could do it, why couldn't anyone else? His family remained his rock throughout it all. They celebrated his victories, comforted him during setbacks, and reminded him daily of how proud they were of the person he had become. His parents, who had once carried immense guilt for letting him go, now radiated joy knowing they had raised someone who used his pain to heal others. Their unconditional love gave him the courage to keep moving forward, even when the road felt uncertain. Eventually, he decided to write a second book, a follow-up to his memoir that focused on lessons learned and advice for aspiring changemakers. Titled From Roots to Wings, it chronicled not only his personal growth but also the stories of those he had met along the way. Each chapter highlighted a different theme: resilience, forgiveness, collaboration, and purpose, offering practical insights and heartfelt encouragement. The book became another bestseller, further cementing his place as a voice for the voiceless. Though accolades poured in, he remained humble, deflecting praise onto the communities and individuals who had shaped his journey. "I didn't do this alone," he often said. "None of us ever does. Every success is a shared success." Looking ahead, he dreamed of a world where foundations like rising together wouldn't be needed, a world where exploitation and inequality were relics of the past. While he knew that vision might take generations to realize, he held on to it fiercely, believing that every step forward mattered. Progress, no matter how slow, was still progress. In his final public speech before stepping back from the limelight, he addressed a packed auditorium filled with supporters, survivors, and advocates. His voice steady yet emotional, he spoke directly to the audience. "When I first started sharing my story, I thought I was doing it for myself, to heal, to process, to survive. But now I know the truth. I did it for all of you. Because if my pain can help even one person feel less alone, then it was worth it." He paused, scanning the room, meeting the eyes of those who had traveled this road with him. "We've come so far, but the journey isn't over. There are still battles to fight, still voices waiting to be heard. So I ask you this: will you rise? Will you stand with those who need us most? Together, we can create a world where everyone has the freedom to dream, the safety to thrive, and the dignity they deserve." The crowd erupted in applause, standing as one to honor the man who had given them so much. As he left the stage, surrounded by loved ones and fellow advocates, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had done what he set out to do, not just for himself but for the countless lives he had touched along the way. And as the sun set on that chapter of his life, he smiled, knowing that the ripple effects of his actions would continue spreading, far beyond anything he could have imagined. After all, hope had a way of growing wings and taking flight.